Shalom, I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to this week's Focus Israel Report. In this week's report, we're going to be sharing with you regarding Israel's government and electoral system. Recently, the government of Israel announced that they will have national elections scheduled to take place on January the 22nd, 2013. The Israeli legislative body is known as the Knesset. Knesset is the Hebrew word for assembly. The Knesset in Israel consists of 120 elected officials. The Jewish people were taken into captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar, Jeremiah chapter 25. Jeremiah prophesied that the Jews would be in Babylon for 70 years. In the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, a remnant of the Jews who were taken captive to Babylon returned to Israel, finding that the walls of the city of Jerusalem and the temple were in ruin. With the help and inspiration of Ezra and Nehemiah, the people returned and physically rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem and built the second temple. This laid the foundation for the Second Temple era, which included the days of the first century, in which Yeshua the Messiah and his disciples lived. In the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, they established an executive and legislative body known as the Men of the Great Assembly. They consisted of 120 of the greatest leaders of the day and included the prophets Ezra, Nehemiah, as well as Mordecai, Zerubbabel, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Among the significant accomplishments of the Men of the Great Assembly included the canonization of the Hebrew Scriptures. In addition, the Men of the Great Assembly established a daily universal Jewish prayer service. The centerpiece of these prayers is known as the Amidah, the standing prayer, or the 18 benedictions. Thirdly, the Men of the Great Assembly developed a permanent Jewish calendar. The biblical or Jewish calendar is based upon the cycle of the moon. A strict lunar calendar is 11 1/4 days less than a solar year. In order to align the lunar calendar with the solar year, the Men of the Great Assembly added a leap month. 7 times every 19 years, a leap month is added. Therefore, the lunar years and the solar years line up exactly every 19 years. Finally, the Men of the Great Assembly established a Jewish religious education system in the land of Israel. Part of establishing the religious education system was the institution of a legal religious judicial body known as the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was responsible for making decisions pertaining to issues of Jewish law. Because this system was not based upon a king ruling over Israel or a monarchy, it gave greater strength and power to the office of the high priest. It is from this historical background is the reason that the Israeli legislative body known as the Knesset consists of 120 members. Each member of the Israeli Knesset is elected to 4-year terms, subject to the possibility of early elections. In Israel, individual members are not directly elected by the people. Potential Knesset members belong to various political parties. Each political party in Israel selects their own candidates for the party, which makes up a party list. As a result, voters in Israel vote for a party, and depending upon how many votes that party receives, the appropriate number of members from that party then become Knesset members. Party representation in the Israeli Knesset is dependent upon the percentage of votes that that party receives in the election. In order for a party to be eligible to be represented in the Israeli Knesset, they must receive at least 2% of the national vote. Because of this system, there are many political parties in Israel. The current Israeli Knesset was determined by elections in 2009. Since the founding of the State of Israel in 1948, there have been 18 national elections. Presently, there are 18 political parties represented in the Israeli Knesset. These 18 parties represents 12 party lists, as sometimes some political parties run together in a joint list in a national election. Following the 2009 Israeli elections, when 12 lists were nominated to the Israeli Knesset, one of the political parties, that is the Labor Party, had a split within it, and those who left the Labor Party formed the Independence Party. Therefore, at this time, there are 13 party lists represented in the current government of Israel. In order to form a government in Israel, you need a ruling majority. Since there are 120 Knesset members in the Israeli government, you need a majority of 61 to run the country. No single political party in Israel have enough elected members to form a majority government on their own. As a result, various parties in Israel need to join together to form a coalition government. The current government of Israel is regarded as a center-right bloc. The political party in Israel that heads the government is the Likud party. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is the head of the Likud party. His government coalition consists of nationalistic and religious parties. Following elections in Israel, the President of Israel consults with representatives of the parties newly elected to the Knesset and assigns the task of forming a coalition government to a Knesset member who is usually the leader of the party that received the largest Knesset representation in the election results. The Knesset member has the task to consult with various political parties and form a coalition government within 28 days. The President of Israel has the right to extend this time of 28 days, but the extension cannot be greater than an additional 14 days. Therefore, in essence, the individual has up to 42 days to form a government. Israel does not have a constitution, but it does have a set of basic laws that specify how the government is structured and the rights of individuals. Following the 2009 Israeli elections, the political party known as Kadima, which in Hebrew means forward, headed by Tzipi Livni and formerly led by the previous Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, which was a political party that was formed by the Prime Minister prior to Ehud Olmert, Ariel Sharon, who then was the leader of the Likud party, broke off from the Likud party in an effort to gain political support for his decision to remove 9,000 Jews from the Gaza Strip in August of 2005. However, Tzipi Livni was unable to form a coalition government, and as a result, Likud leader Benjamin Netanyahu was given the opportunity to do so. He was able to accomplish the task by forming a government coalition consisting of his own party, Likud, along with a right-wing Russian immigrant party known as Israel Beitenu, Israel Our Home, along with the Orthodox religious parties of Shas, United Torah Judaism, and Jewish Home, in addition to the Labor Party from the political left. In a disagreement with Israel government policy, 5 Knesset members of the Labor Party, headed by Israel Defense Minister Ehud Barak, left the Labor Party to form the Independence Party. Initially, Benjamin Netanyahu had 74 Knesset members in his coalition. After the split in Labor, he was still able to maintain a majority of 66 Knesset members. Earlier this year, there was a dispute in Israeli politics regarding a law that allows Orthodox Jews to indefinitely not serve in the Israeli army. This law was struck down by the Israeli High Court of Justice. Political disagreements over the matter created conditions where the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu strongly considered calling for early Israel elections. However, at the last moment, an agreement was reached with the opposition party Kadima to join the existing government coalition. As a result, proposed early elections were called off. However, in July of this year, after failing to reach a compromise on this issue, the political party Kadima decided to pull out of the government coalition. Israel law requires that if the government is not able to pass a state budget, that it must call for early elections. Concerned that his government would not be able to do just that, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu decided to call for early elections in the first part of October in order to try to ensure that his political party list would receive the greatest number of votes in the January 22nd election, enabling him to remain Prime Minister of Israel. Netanyahu announced that his political party, the Likud Party, would join with the Israel-Russian Nationalist Immigration Party known as Israel Beitenu, Israel Our Home, headed by current Israeli Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman, that they would run on a joint list. This announcement shocked the political establishment in Israel, as in the past Israel Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman has made statements regarding the peace process in his belief that the Palestinians aren't willing and able to agree to a negotiated peace settlement with Israel, thus running the risk of Israel and the government of Benjamin Netanyahu be viewed by the international community in a negative light. On October the 25th, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of the Likud Party and Israel Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman of the political party Israel Beitenu, which means Israel Our Home, announced that their parties would run together on a joint list for the next Israeli elections scheduled for January the 22nd. In making the decision, Netanyahu said, "Israel is facing difficult challenges, and it's time to unite powers for the state of Israel. A joint Likud Israel Beitenu party list will strengthen the government of Israel. It will strengthen the prime minister. It will strengthen the country. And as a result, we are asking the Israeli voting public to vote for us to help us to deal with Israel's security threats, the greatest of which is stopping Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons and fighting terrorism, as well as support for dealing with Israeli economic issues, as well as educational concerns." On October the 30th, the Likud Party in Israel voted to approve the merger with the party of Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman, Israel Beitenu. According to current polling, the Likud-Israel Beitenu merger shows mixed results, as some polls show their merger will result in increased seats in the Israeli Knesset, while other polls indicate that their merger will receive less seats. Current election polls show that the combined party of Likud and Israel Beitenu would win the most seats in the next elections, thus be able to form the next Israel coalition government, causing Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to remain as Prime Minister. Next would be the Labor Party with 23 seats, up from the current 8 seats. Then the Sephardic Orthodox Jewish Shas Party, 14 seats, up from the current 11. Next would be 13 Knesset seats by a new political party that formed this year in Israel called Yesh Atid, There is a Future, headed by Yair Lapid, a former Israeli journalist and television personality. This would be followed by the joint religious Zionist parties of National Union and Bayit Yehudi, Jewish Home, followed by Kadima, projected to only have 5 seats, down from the present 28. Based upon these poll results, Benjamin Netanyahu would be able to form a center-right government of about 64 seats. Israeli elections are scheduled for January the 22nd, 2013. Until we do it again, Shalom, in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.